Hi there, my name is Memo, this is my channel, Houseplantygoodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion. You might be able to see some of it behind me, it's tropical houseplants. So today, by popular demand, I think I've had an awful lot of people wanting a second part to this video. This is a bit of an update video on my prayer plants, Calatheas, Stromanthes, ctenanthes, Marantas, all of the above, and I think it might just be a bit of a catch-all all about prayer plants. So through this video, I'm going to talk about where some of these plants are now, how they're doing, what my experience has been with them. I'll also talk about some of the prayer plants that are actually a bit more challenging. At least they have been in my experience, and also based on what I'm hearing from people here on YouTube and on Instagram. We'll talk a bit about the reclassification of the Calathea plants. I'll also mention some other easy prayer plants that I've experienced, and also that certain family and friends have experienced as well. And to wrap up, I want to talk about some of the challenges that you might get with some of the prayer plants, just so you know what you're getting in for, and also what I've done in my kind of environment to try to negate some of this, and I've had success with the plants that I've had so far. So prayer plants generally, and I will just call them as prayer plants because they're part of that family of plants. And again, just so I don't have to keep saying Stramanthi, ctenanthe, Calathea, or Maranta. I'm lumping them all into one category just because it'll make it easier for this video, and you don't want me to saying all those plants every time I refer to them, so they will, at least for this video, be known as prayer plants. Kicking off, I wanted to kind of give a bit of an update on some of the plants that you might have seen either on my Instagram, and if you're not following me on my Instagram, please do. That's probably the best place that you can kind of get a hold of me if you want to ask any questions. I'm only around on YouTube for the first day or two after I post, so you can find me there a bit more easily. But yes, so I've posted some of these prayer plants on my Instagram. I've shown them sometimes on some of my YouTube videos, and a lot of people are asking, give us a bit of an update. So this is your update, essentially. So the first plant is one that I've had great success with, and this is the ctenanthe amagris or amagris. And this is a plant that I got, and it was absolutely tiny. It was only 3 or 4 leaves. I think I may have a photo from my plant care app when I first got it. If I do, I will add it here. If not, I don't always take the pictures of the Calatheas for my watering because of the way that I water a lot of my Calatheas. It tends to be one picture for all of the plants on my plant care app and just go water all of your prayer plants now. So I think I may have one of this, so I will add it here, as I said. But this was a very small plant. It's a very, very cool prayer plant because you will get those kind of purple burgundy underside of the leaves. You do get some of that marking. And I'm not going to lie, and I will be showing warts and all for this video. You might be able to see some leaf curl, and I'll see if I can bring it in. If not, I'll just insert a video here. And I've also got some crisping on this plant. That is one of the realities I want to talk about today. You will get crispy edges on the leaves, and you might get rolling of the leaves and all these things. If you cannot deal with that, and again, this is a video that there's a reason why I haven't done it for a long time, because my, not necessarily opinion, but my kind of general experience with prayer plants has not been the greatest. The ones that I'm showing you here today are the ones that I have found to be exceptionally hardy, and even if they take a few knocks, they will keep on going. A lot of the plants that you're going to see on this video today, I have had for multiple years. And there is nothing I've realized quite like talking badly about prayer plants online to get a lot of people in the plant community triggered. There's a lot of people that are sitting there going, yep, completely agree, would never touch them with a barge pole, too much hassle, more so than it's worth. And there is a lot of people that are huge fanatics. So very polarizing types of plants, basically. The one thing I will say about prayer plants generally is I'd be really curious to see, especially if you're watching this video and you've had prayer plants for more than a few months, I'm talking about years here, and you've been able to keep them in a relatively good condition. Please do drop a comment down below and maybe tell the rest of us what it is that you're doing right, because there's a lot of people that are very, very fond. And don't get me wrong, a lot of these prayer plants are beautiful. They have got some of the most interesting markings in most houseplants. However, they tend to be marketed for beginners or people just starting off because they're so readily available. Granted, there is the flip side of that, that because they're so readily available and generally they're relatively inexpensive in most places, if it dies, you could always replace it, and that's fine. But people tend to get a bit disappointed when it comes to these are plants that people want to keep relatively pristine. And at least in my experience and the experience of a lot of other people, these are exceptionally difficult plants to keep pristine. Now, the ones that I'm going to show you today are the ones that I've been able to keep as pristine as possible. And they still aren't perfect. There is burning on the leaves and all of these things. There is browning on the tips. There's curling on the leaves. A whole host of things. But let me put this plant down and I will show you one of the other ones. So another plant that I don't talk about, I don't think I've ever shown this on here, because usually when you see me film, I've got a table that sits right next to me. It's a glass top table, and this used to sit underneath the glass top table and get beat down by quite intense light throughout most of the day. This is my Calathea Beauty Star, and it's a relatively small plant. It's not particularly large, but again, this is a plant that I got very, very small, and it has grown to this size. And I will say in this video the same thing that I did in my previous video about Calathea, and I'll link it up here if you haven't seen that. These plants, for me at least, if you get them from a very small kind of plantlet size and grow them in your environment, generally they tend to do better, even the slightly more challenging ones. The difficulty with that, however, is you don't get that instant wow factor that you might get from a fully grown plant, that you might get from a plant store. The flip side of that is the bigger plants, the more mature plants that you get from a plant store generally might throw a bit of a hissy fit, even by you just bringing them home. They've been grown in very, very specific conditions, and Calatheas, people don't talk about this enough, but prayer plants in general, they tend to be, at least in my experience, creatures of habit. And people talk about that a lot when they talk about ficuses, but they don't ever talk about that with prayer plants. And at least in my experience, they are very much creatures of habit. If you change things kind of abruptly with them, the same way that you would do with a ficus, they tend to throw a bit of a hissy fit. Now, with ficuses, it's a lot more obvious because a lot of ficuses, if you change their conditions really abruptly, you might get a lot of leaf drop. You might not even get yellowing and crisping. You might just get them dropping their leaves. Calatheas tend to be a bit of a slower hissy fit. So you might get browning, you might get curling, you might get the plant being in distress, you might then be more susceptible to things like spider mites. And we'll talk about spider mites in just a little bit, because you know it's a video about prayer plants. We're going to talk about spider mites at some point. But they are creatures of habit. So try not to change their environment too drastically too often. A plant that's kind of slightly different or kind of slightly harder to find, although I am seeing this a lot more in Europe and the UK, is the Maranta Nera, Crechoviana, and I've got the variegated plant here, and you can see some of the variegated there. Interesting bit of information on this again, and you know I like to kind of dive into the names a bit more. Nera, again, I think probably has some links to kind of ancient Greek. Lefko or Luko, Lefko means white or pale, and Nera is, it's either going to mean waters or it's going to mean nerves. So Nevra or Nera. So with this plant, I would assume that it's probably to do with the actual nervation on the actual leaves, so the nerves that you see going through the leaves, and that is probably where it got its name, which again, just a bit of random information. you might find interesting. But this is an interesting one because I got this as a cutting and I got this as a water propagated cutting, and I've been growing this in pond and it's doing exceptionally well. I don't know how well that's being picked up, but the roots are coming out the bottom. And yes, I know I need to repot this relatively soon, but Marantas generally, not Calatheas, not Stramanthes, not ctenanthes, Marantas generally tend to be some of the most forgiving out of all of the prayer plants. The other ones that I mentioned earlier on that you saw, my ctenanthe ambergris, ctenanthes generally are also some of the more hardy of the prayer plants. Another one would be the Calathea Ornata, and this has got very, very ornate leaves. It kind of, for me, I always find that it looks like it's almost the illusion of the darker sections look like leaves, the paler section looks like you're looking through leaves. So it's a very, very cool plant. And the backs of the leaves can be quite interesting as well because they're almost like the photo opposite of what the top bit is. I do love this plant and I love the bigger versions of this plant. At least in pond, it has taken... This was the same size now as it was when I bought it 2.5 years ago. So, and granted, this has gone through a lot of iterations and it's thrown hesiphyts and it's thrown leaves. The reason why I'm showcasing it in this video today and the reason why it's still in my collection is out of a lot of my plants, this is under no kind of illusion one of the biggest fighters of the plants that I've had because it's not been happy. It's not been happy for a while, but it's still surviving. So for me, this gives me the indication that this plant is a bit of a fighter, if nothing else. It won't just crisp up and die almost instantly. The next plant is a plant that you might not see very often, and this is, I'm trying to bring it into frame because it is a relatively large plant. I'll see if I can insert a few clips as well. I'll show you the backside of this because it is stunning. This is the Stramanthi Magic Star. So a lot of people know the trio star, but this is the magic star. And the reason why I ended up getting this is when I was first starting, and just to give you some context, this plant is 4 years old. So when I was first starting off and I was starting my collection in the very early days, probably about 4.5 years ago now, this plant I bought thinking, because I didn't know and I didn't do enough research, it was the Stramanthi Trio Star, not the Magic Star. I did eventually get the Trio Star. I've had 2 or 3 Trio Stars in my care. All of them have since perished. This one, again, similar to the Macayana that I was just mentioning a moment ago, the story behind this one was when I moved the last time and moved into this property, this was sitting in a bathroom. It was getting beat down on light for the summer. It was getting very little light in the winter. It probably wasn't getting the humidity that it needed. It ended up with about 2 or 3 leaves or 2 or 3 stems with leaves on them. And that was it. And during the move, I was sitting there going, I'm going to throw this away. There's no point. I need to move like over 400 or 500 plants. I cannot be bothered to take something that's probably going to die off in the new house anyway. I did still decide to, you know what, I'll take it with me. And I've put it in the bathroom of this location. So it's getting slightly less bright light, but more consistent light. And it's getting humidity in a bathroom again. The ultimate glow up, basically. So this has taken about 1.5 years to get here. But considering that it literally looked like it was on its last legs and about to die with only 2 or 3 leaves and 2 or 3 stems, the fact that you can barely see the actual pot itself is also buckling. You might be able to see this there. So this is due a repot, but we'll talk about repots in just a moment. And now for some honorable mentions. And these are plants that are no longer with me very recently for very different reasons. So one, from that original video, my Calathea orbifolia, which I kind of achieved where I wanted it and it was getting absolutely huge. I have since gifted it to a friend, basically, because they really like the look of that plant. And it is a plant that I can get in a bigger form whenever I decide to get one again, because it's one that I can relatively easily find in most plant stores. I will see if I've got a picture from my plant care app and add it here. But anybody who's seen that original video will know that I started it off as a very small plant and it has grown since because I wanted to do it that way. And I found that way it was the hardiest that I've ever seen it. But yeah, so that's the honorable mention number 1. The other one is the Calathea, I think it's still a Calathea rufibarba, and that is the one with the green leaves, fully solid green leaves, kind of ruffled as well. If I can find a picture or a video, I'll insert it somewhere at this stage. And that one's also the one that's got the slightly hairy backs of the leaves, which are very, very tactile. That one, unfortunately, I just went recently on holiday and I did really well. I gave amazing instructions. All the plants from the individual that was taking care of all my plants, I came back and not only did nothing die, they also were thriving. The one unfortunate incident is that that plant was sitting down on the floor, and it was a plant that, I don't know if anybody has this, that it's always in your peripheral, but it's not a plant that you always pay attention to. And occasionally you'll see it and go, oh, I need to water that. So take it up and water it. I forgot to give instructions to that individual to water that plant. And obviously when you've got this many plants, it's really easy to kind of assume that you've watered everything, even if you don't see that. And my friend kind of looked at this plant and just went, I think I killed one. And I'm just like, not your fault. I should have said about watering. And I went away and it was for 2 weeks and it was relatively warm days. That crisped up. In fairness, that plant was already starting to show signs of a struggle, and that's another plant that I started very small. I started it at the same time that I started with the Calathea Ornata, and it was the same size. And it got to be a very, very large plant. So kind of, you're looking at, if you just remembered the magic star that I showed now, about that size, absolutely huge. That will be, and I don't say this very often, that will be a prayer plant that I will be repurchasing, purely because I am a weirdo and I do like to run my fingers in the leaves of that plant because the fuzziness as well. And that is another one that does really, really well. That is, out of a lot of my prayer plants, that is one that very rarely, for me at least, has ever got spider mites. Let's touch on some of the not so easy prayer plants. So one, and this is one that I have wanted for a very, very long time, going on 4 years now, and they have become a bit more readily available, at least here in the UK. The prices aren't that expensive. I know in the US this was a lot more readily available for years now, but that is the Calathea White Fusion. It's a beautiful plant. I'll see if I can get a picture and insert it here, but if you're really into your Calatheas, you've probably come across it. I think there's now the yellow fusion as well, so instead of the white variegation, you get the yellow variegation. Those, from what I'm hearing from everybody, are notoriously difficult to keep happy because they need high humidity levels. Granted, in my conservatory, I probably could keep it relatively happy. And as I've said, the prices have come down in the UK, but not down enough that it's almost considered kind of a common houseplant. When it gets to that stage, I probably will buy one. Because at that point, if I end up spending 10 to 15 Great British pounds and it perishes, I'm okay with that. Even now, still, I think occasionally when I see them, they're like between 30, 50, or even 60 or 70 Great British pounds. It's still not the most expensive plant that I own by far, but that's still too expensive of a risk for me, knowing what I know from other people that a lot of these plants just die up and go crispy really quickly. Beautiful plant, don't get me wrong. The other one that is a lot more readily available, and I did have one at some point, and if I can find a picture, I will add it, of my one, which was definitely struggling for the majority of its life. And this is also one of the plants that a lot of people, when they're first starting off, will buy because, I don't know, some people are just attracted to the fact that they've got pinstripe, pinkish variegations, and that is the Calathea Ornata or the Calathea pinstripe. In my experience, and in the experience of a lot of people that I talk to, and I know there will always be exceptions. If you are the exception, do let us know. I'm sure you will in the comments down below, and tell us what you are doing specifically to care for it, and also how long you've had it for. Because this is one of the ones that I think a lot of the people that are going, I'm still keeping my one happy, have only had it for a few months. I might be wrong, but do let us know if you've had it for a long time and what you're doing with it. But the Calathea Ornata, which is one that a lot of people first get, possibly one of the hardest Calatheas to keep happy, basically. So just putting that out there. And just touching really briefly on classifications and names. Calatheas specifically have been reclassified, at least from what I can see online, as Gopertias or Gopertias. And I'll put the name because... But from the research that I have done, They were originally classified as Gopertias when they were first kind of discovered. And I'm not going to touch on the concept of discovering a plant that's been native to a certain region of the world for years. Anyway, it is one of those plants that has been reclassified as Gopertia again. So it was Gopertia when it was first discovered. It then turned into Calatheas. It has now gone back to Gopertias. This is another one that can be quite a challenge for some people because snake plants are the other thing. So snake plants have, or the Sansevierias, or have been reclassified as Dracaenas. People do still struggle after they've called snake plants Sansevierias for so long to now start calling them Dracaenas. From what I'm seeing, the Gopertia thing is pretty much the same. But this is quite normal in the scientific field. Things will get reclassified. And I think the reason why this specific group of plants, the Calatheas, got reclassified as Gopertias is because science has come a long way. Previously, plants were put into specific genera based on their blooms. And that was the one thing. So people would wait until a bloom would come out in a plant in order for it to be able to be classified into a specific genera, basically. But these days, because we've got DNA testing, basically, they can actually take DNA from these plants and actually really look at it and compare it to other Calatheas, like true Calatheas, and go, oh, actually, no, this isn't a Calathea. This DNA is very similar to a Gopertia, so it's probably a Gopertia. So that's what's happening a lot of the times. And I think that's what's happened with the Sansevierias into Dracaenas, and I'm pretty sure that's what's happened with the Calatheas, some of the Calatheas. I don't think it's all Calatheas, some of the Calatheas into Gopertias. So to start wrapping up the video, I'll talk about what some of my experiences have been with these plants, where the challenges might lie, and what you can do in order to help your plants along and have happy prayer plants for as long as you possibly can. So I'm not going to harp on about watering these plants. There's an awful lot of videos about care of prayer plants specifically, but generally they like to have evenly moist soil and they like to never fully dry out. I will challenge that slightly. A lot of my prayer plants, every single one of them actually that you've just seen now, I will usually let go dry before I water. The challenge, and this is where it starts getting tricky, and this is why I don't think necessarily that these are the best plants for somebody when they're first beginning, because they can be quite disappointing quite quickly, and there's a very steep learning curve. You can let them go dry. My plant care app, and I will link it up here as well, is a really good way that I can do that, because I will let them go fully dry and I've got a reminder to check for the soil moisture and then water, basically. Because the thing that I have found with a lot of prayer plants is you can let them go fully dry. I find they do prefer that. But if you let them go dry and stay dry for a day or two, you start getting struggles. You'll start getting leaf curl, you start getting more browning on the leaves, you will start seeing a lot more spider mites. So it is a very fine balance of giving the plant what it needs, which is moisture, and to go towards dryness, because the roots are as fine as they are and they can rot easily. At the same time, most prayer plants have also got tubers, little potato-looking things in the soil, which is interesting because when you've got tuberous kind of roots, they tend to, at least most plants, will tend to be a bit more resilient to moisture being around their roots all the time. But yeah, so getting that balance can be tricky at times. One last thing as well that I do when it comes to the watering is I will always use my aroid soil mix. And again, I've got a video talking about what my mix is and I'll link it at the top there. But I have found that to work a lot better, because I know you can get soil mixes for calatheas and prayer plants and all these things, and they're moisture retenting and also really good at drainage. A really good aroid mix, which has just got really good drainage, will generally work for these plants as well, I have found. So the matter of curled leaves, when the leaves turn in like a bit of a cigar, there's a few things that can cause this. And I love it when leaves can show signs of distress for two very different things in the same way. So an example of that for any other plant would be a leaf turning yellow because of overwatering, or a leaf turning yellow because of underwatering. Madness. But with the curling of most prayer plants' leaves, again, it's a similar situation. It could be the fact that it is underwatered, so it's curling to retain some of its moisture. It can also do it when it's getting too much light. I don't think it will generally do it when it's underwatered. When it's underwatered, I think sometimes it will curl up as well. So yeah, it's the same as yellowing of the leaves. But you will get the crispiness a lot quicker, so you can generally see the difference there. It's not going to be a video about prayer plants unless we talk about spider mites. Yes, spider mites after the alocasias are actually pretty much on par with the alocasias. I don't think. Maybe my prayer plants are more susceptible to spider mites than even my alocasias. It's a bit of a battle there. But yeah, at the drop of a hat, these plants will get spider mites. So in my experience, and the best thing that I have found to work is preventing or kind of preemptive action rather than curative action. And by that I mean predatory mites. There are satchels of predatory mites that will eat spider mites. Buy those. I'm not going to sit here and debate different options. That's literally the only thing that has worked for me every time. Get those, get them now, get them before you get the infestation, and keep them topped up, and you should be okay. There is still a risk that you might get some spider mites, but nowhere near of it getting out of control. And this is one of the plant types, so kind of the prayer plants, that you can get a few spider mites one day and you turn around and a couple of days later it is infested with spider mites. They love prayer plants. So be preemptive with it and don't wait until you have to react, because at that point the damage is pretty much already done to the leaves. You can still salvage the plant, but you might end up having to chop like a third of the plant off. Circling back slightly to when we were talking about the soil and the roots, repotting can be quite challenging with these plants as well, because, and this is something that I don't think is discussed enough, when you lift the plant out of its pot with the roots around it, basically, try not to jostle the roots or try to remove all the soil, or if you can, any soil out from the kind of root mass, because most prayer plants will throw a bit of a hissy fit if you mess with their roots and their soil too much. So what you would be ideally doing is lifting up, and let me see if I can bring one up and show you, is something like lifting it up as is, and then potting it into its new media with new soil and just covering around it. Try not to sit there and like scrunch the roots up too much or try to take any of the soil out. They will throw a bit of a hissy fit. They do not like to be messed with. And again, you can see they don't like their roots being messed with. They don't like to be moved too much or their environment changing too much. There's a reason why a lot of people call these plants drama queens. Talking about light levels with this plant. And this is the interesting thing that I have found, because a lot of the times I'm going to hit the nail on the head now and say, everybody who's bought this as a low light plant, no, there is no such thing as a low light loving plant. Low light generally means those plants will take longer to die, basically. But ideally, with prayer plants, give them medium or sometimes bright indirect light. Pretty much most of my prayer plants are in bright indirect light. Slightly filtered bright indirect light, but still bright indirect light. And they see a boom of growth, even in the summer. And you know what? I don't mind getting the occasional leaf that might have a bit of sun scorching on it. That's fine, because I've got one leaf with a bit of sun scorching, I've got one leaf that is curled, but I've got 15, 20, 30 new leaves because I gave it good lighting conditions. So it's a bit of a balance basically with that one. And to wrap up a bit more about the watering side of things, there's a lot of people that will go on about using filtered water or rainwater or reverse osmosis water or distilled water or buying bottled water. Please never buy bottled water for your plants. Like, come on, take a moment, step back and think that most of these plants are growing in the wild. Nobody's sitting there with bottled water adding them, and you don't want to be adding any more plastic to the world that we live in just so you can water your plants. All of my plants are being watered, and they have been since day one. Maybe for like a year I tried some kind of Brita filtered water, but I didn't see much of a difference. So they are pretty much all on tap water now. And I'll get the occasional browning or crisping on the very edges of the leaf, and that is, just so that you know what is causing that, is salts from the tap water going and depositing itself along the edge of the leaf, and that's what's causing it to crisp up. It's those salts that might be in tap water. And I know certain places in certain countries, certain cities have got higher salt levels in their water, and you might get more damage to your plants. That might be different, basically. But in the UK, and I mean, to be fair, we've got relatively hard water, especially where I live. It doesn't seem to cause too many issues. The one thing I will add as a bit of an amendment here is when you're fertilizing with liquid fertilizer, make sure that the soil has already been moistened, then use the fertilizer so you don't get kind of salt buildup and burn on the leaves. And make sure that every so often, after you've kind of, especially in the summer when it's growing and you're fertilizing probably a bit more frequently, you do a flush. So you run the whole pot under running water to kind of leach out all of those salts so that you've got less of those salts in the soil that will create that crispiness on the leaves. But yeah, I think that's everything I wanted to say. Hopefully I haven't poo-pooed too much on prayer plants. I do still have some prayer plants. Granted, they're not plants that I tend to gravitate towards anymore, but I know a lot of people when they're first starting off get really enamored with it. I was exactly the same. And I think a lot of us were as well, to be fair, because the foliage is stunning. But all I would advise is exercise some caution and do your research. A lot of the times, most people, when they're first starting off, they're probably not going to do their research before they buy their plant. But hopefully videos like this will help. Just so you kind of, knowledge is key here. If you know that some of these things are the things that you're going to be expecting and what you could do to fix them, hopefully that will help you have prayer plants for as long as I've had mine, or many, many years past that as well. So yeah, hopefully you've enjoyed. I am sure there's going to be quite a few comments on this. This might be the most controversial video that I've done so far. But yeah, hopefully you've enjoyed this. Hopefully I shall see you here soon, and I truly, truly hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.